Good morning. Hi, Timo. Hi, Ed. Jeff, good to see you. It is an absolutely fine morning here in Santa Barbara, California. Good to see some familiar faces out there. As always, just waiting for my people to come up here from the R&D team, and I fill the space with light banter. Good morning, Will. Good to see you. For those of you who are following, Will and Low Labs team help get a proposal up for superfluid staking that's now live on Osmosis. For that would be for pool number 42, the Osmo and Regen pool. So definitely check that out if you're a Osmo token holder and have a feeling one way or the other. It's your opportunity to go and cast a vote before June 6th. Keep that in mind. And actually, maybe I will. I'll just pull you up and you can explain what superfluid staking is for anyone who may not fully be aware. If you are there, Will, I did invite you up.
So superfluid staking is something native to the osmosis ecosystem where they have a slightly different token economic model from other Cosmos chains in that they're DEX. And so they split their inflation rewards across liquidity providers and stakers, as opposed to in a chain like Regen. Right now, all of our inflation is going to stakers. So, because they split that, there traditionally have been market incentives for people to LP their Osmo instead of staking them, which in the extreme could be a risk to the security of the network if there was just a kind of very low percentage of tokens being staked. And so to get around this, Osmosis introduced this superfluid mechanism, and superfluid means that tokens can be simultaneously bonded in liquidity provisioning and staked on the Osmosis proof of stake chain at the same time. This because the LP tokens are in pairs with non-Osmo tokens, in this case Regen tokens, there is some risk that the protocol is taking on in its exposure to those other tokens. So because of that, there's a governance process to get pools approved for superfluid through osmosis governance. So essentially, this proposal right now is just determining whether the community is comfortable enough with Regen to have the Regen pair be a superfluid pool where people in a 14-day bond can use some of their Osmo in that Regen Osmo pair, both for LPing and for staking. So I guess that that got pretty technical, but hopefully that's a basic overview.
That's great. Thank you, Will. That's helpful. So yeah, so you have till June 6th, everybody, if you do want to cast a vote one way or the other. But in the meantime, our erstwhile host, Gregory Landaway, has joined us. Gregory, good morning. How's the Maple Farm?
It's good. Yeah, I was actually just down doing some work and looked at my phone and was like, oh, it's time to hop on the Regenerati News Hour. So it's good to be here. Nice to see everybody. Hello, hello. Lots of stuff to jam about. Pretty excited about superfluid staking with Osmo Regen. It's fun. Thanks for sharing a little bit, Will. Yeah, let me see. I'm just kind of I just literally just ran up the hill from my other life here, so I'm kind of collecting my thoughts. So just to kind of invite everybody into my world for a second, we're just getting prepped to put in an orchard here at the Berkshire Sweet Gold Maple Farm, and some coordinating a little bit of tree removal, some wood chipping, some planting, and we're going to be putting in a cool orchard that's kind of mixed, some cherry, some pear. Around here, pear really is like the champion fruit tree, requiring very little maintenance. Some mulberries, um, and a couple apples, but apples need a lot of love here in the Northeast, so not a lot of apples. And just putting in, I don't know, it'll be like a 2 or 3 acre orchard. So that was what I was spending my morning working on. Thursdays are my favorite days of the week because I spend the beginning part of my morning working on the farm, and then I get to come straight to jam with all of you. So that's such an awesome kind of blessing. I don't know. It's just exciting to get to do the news, get to jam with everybody on Regenerati News Hour, and do so right after kind of just working on the farm. So that's what's up in my world. So let's see. I think I'm really interested in having conversation this week.
Hey, Gregory, I think you muted yourself.
Oh, well, I don't think I muted myself, but I did get muted.
Huh. Okay, sorry. And by the way, our friends that branch out are here also. I know they were planning to hop up at
Fantastic.
some
Yes,
point, so
I
I'll
was
leave
just
it to you
getting
to
to
bring them up when
that.
you're ready.
That's what was getting cut off. So let me finish that statement. I'm not sure where I got cut off, but this week in Regenerati's News Hour, we're going to have the Branch Out folks talk about the cool work that they're proposing to the Regen community around Climate Wiki. I see Ricardo in the audience. Excited to have him and anybody else up that wants to talk about on-chain standards governance and some of the, I guess you might say, turmoil and emerging conversations around carbon credits and refi, and just kind of I want to dig into that a little bit. I want to dig in not on the hype cycle and not on the hot take wavelength, because that's not really what we're up to at Regen or in the Regenerati News Hour, but really just digging in with a little bit more rigor about, I'm hoping Ricardo can share a little bit about his sense as a veteran about in the carbon space of what it's going to take to invite legacy institutions into where this is all moving with on-chain governance. Talk a little bit about that, and then get into the details, maybe with some of the folks working on Regen Registry. I see Rebecca in the audience. Will might chime in from the foundation and just kind of share and ideate on what it looks like to have natively on-chain, but legacy institutional, sort of backwards compatible on-chain carbon standards. So that's where I think the conversation will go towards the latter part. So my suggestion is we spend about another 10 minutes or so to chat about what Branch Out is doing. I'll have you guys hop up. As it's a Commonwealth proposal, it's about to become a governance proposal. This is sort of active and important moment to have a community forum around a proposal to improve Regen Network. And then we'll shift gears and talk about this sort of the larger topic at hand. And, as I'm naming that, it's sort of on-chain standards governance and digital monitoring, reporting, and verification, and how we're planning and attempting to integrate those two in Regen Network. So with that kind of framing, welcome up, Branch Out. Excited to have you all here. And you want to just take a moment to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your proposal to the community?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really fun process the last few months, getting to know the Regen Network team and the foundation and the community, and think about how we can design the Climate Wiki in collaboration. So my name's Thomas. I am founder, Branch Out, currently the executive director. We're a regenerative media nonprofit, so we're both working in climate journalism and increasingly climate media more generally, as well as regenerative projects on the ground, and looking for ways to help make them symbiotic, support each other both financially and substantially. And so Climate Wiki is our newest project. It's something that we're really excited about in terms of the potential for Web3 to help accelerate and improve upon the amazing things that wikis already enable in terms of like knowledge sharing, collaboration, participation, open source. And so we see Climate Wiki as really feeling this very urgent general need for addressing climate change, where there's so much news, so many scientific articles, and there's not a hub that compiles all of this and helps to parse it, helps to condense it, helps the communities that need this information to really make the most of it and do that in a way that is collaborative. And so we think that this general purpose is very well served by working with the Regen Network. It's a way to show the expertise of the community and the constituencies within the network. And we also feel like there are a lot of ways that a Climate Wiki will really help support and align with the Regen Network specific project and vision, whether that be around methodology development and kind of creating an interface where new and wider audiences can learn about eco credits, can learn about methodologies, can see the process, can be involved in participatory vetting, so that you have a more open source and transparent way of approaching and understanding eco credits, and the ability to kind of link all of that to a more general knowledge base. So someone who may just be interested in learning about carbon sequestration or soil degradation can be just a click or two away from learning about a project hosted built on regen, like the eco credits, and a way for land stewards also to just have access to the best knowledge about what they can be doing to improve their practices, how they can access the best compensation for it. So that's a summary kind of just Climate Wiki as a whole. We are also planning some Web3 features around the tokenomics to be able to compensate people for contributing to the wiki, because we think that this knowledge work is incredibly important and needs to be valorized, and that there are some really interesting ways that we can think about how to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, great overview. Yeah, I'm actually just taking a moment, and maybe if you want to tweet this out as well, to pull up the Commonwealth proposal. I would really encourage folks to have a look at. There's a poll, which I'm not sure if the timing ended on the poll. Yeah, no, there's a day left. So I would encourage everybody who is active on the Commonwealth forum to go have a look. It's a really, well fleshed out proposal around funding Climate Wiki and their desire to sort of launch on Regen. And also, I think there's a couple of things that I want to dig into here in more detail, but I kind of want to call out that some unique features around, I guess, Regen Network more broadly, and how excited I am about Branch Out's approach, which is, on Regen as an application-specific blockchain, there's governance gating to people spinning up new tokens or projects. But that doesn't mean that people can't spin up new projects or tokens. And this is a really exciting example of showing Regen community a synergistic approach with its own token economics that interfaces with Regen and the proof of stake token and eco credits and minting, has its own unique vision for how that's going to come together, and is kind of like reaching out for support, right? And saying, hey, here's a plan. We'd like to use Regen in the following way. We need to bootstrap, but then also we're pledging to sort of launch on top of Regen and build sort of an addition or a set of features with their own token economics that weave into the larger application of the origination of ecological credits and really regenerative action as an outcome of the network. So just like want to take a moment to celebrate that and applaud that. And, I think generally speaking, I really like the sort of governance gating of features because it slows us all down to have a conversation about how we're investing time and attention and energy. And of course, this is a very different approach than sort of the arbitrary permissionless smart contracting approach, in which there's a lot of just, hey, just go do it, sort of forces us, I think, out of the move fast and break things approach, which, I tend to think is maybe a little problematic vis-a-vis refi, that we actually kind of need to slow down. We need to be thoughtful. We need to sort of start to calibrate innovation to the pace of trust and social processes and really regeneration. So I'm pretty excited to see this moving through. I'm pretty excited to see the conversation kick up. So that's sort of like a pattern level observation to just share with folks. And I would really encourage everybody go check out the Commonwealth forum post here. It's at the top of Regen's Commonwealth. I'll take a moment to tweet about it in just a moment. And so thank you a lot for taking the time to have a well-reasoned sort of approach and taking the time to talk with all the stakeholders and start this process off. I'm pretty excited about it. Anything you want to share on that front? Yeah.
I mean, I just want to echo that I agree really strongly with the need for kind of having that balance to be able to move slow as well as fast and to kind of calibrate the way we engage with this technology in ways that are, whether it's biomimicry of natural systems or just kind of in sync with the pace of regeneration, as you said. As far as stakeholders, I also just wanted to mention that I think one of the things we're really excited about with Climate Wiki is that it's such a collaborative project, both wikis inherently and our vision for how we want to work with as many projects in the refi space as possible and tailor it to be able to really ensure that those stakeholders' needs are met. And a really big part of that for us is also ensuring that equity and justice is really brought to the forefront of the conversation. And so just to give one example, Polira DAO is here in the audience. They're a partner we're very excited to be working with around incorporating Indigenous design principles, thinking about how to ethically and effectively bring Indigenous knowledge into the conversation with the wiki, make sure that the methods of compensation are fair. And that's something we've also been talking about with Austin and the Regen Foundation. So we really like Regen Network and the Regen Foundation because of this emphasis and the ideas around having decentralized governance, not just be whoever has the most tokens, but being thoughtful and deliberate about including stakeholders, making sure that Indigenous stewardship is given its importance in the process of regeneration and how collaboration can enable us to achieve what we need to address the climate crisis.
Awesome. Yeah, super exciting there. And I see a couple folks in the audience have requested I'll get you up in just a moment. I kind of want to double click on something. As I'm looking in the forum, I noticed that Will Zoll commented and had some, I guess, maybe like critiques mostly of the budget. I kind of want to call this out because Will, I actually think as I'm reading through it, I don't necessarily agree with your take here on the budget, but you could be right and you could be wrong. So I think it warrants a quick conversation here, just to sort of like daylight this, and then let's move. Let's not attempt to sort of like fully reconcile anything, but just have a quick conversation. Community can hear it, and then people can go and chime in on Commonwealth. So, Will, you're sort of pointing out that it takes a big budget to launch a new token. One thing I'd like to sort of mention is that it reads to me that BranchOut is wanting to, as closely as possible, follow existing eco-credit standards, but have sort of an eco-knowledge credit. And so I sort of want to call out that the more complex the token design is to begin with, the higher the technical cost, right? And the higher the launch cost. But if there's a very simple token design to begin with, right, and you're not making complex token mechanics, and you sort of like are involving a community and complexifying this over time, actually launching a token, like the functionality to launch an eco credit already exists and has essentially zero marginal cost. There isn't a big cost to that. So, Will and the Branch Out team, I'd love for you to just maybe chat a little bit about, specifically just take a moment to be a little bit more precise around, not the vision of the token, but what is the minimum viable launch condition to have a token in the system that is incentivizing knowledge contribution, and how much is that encumbering the work or empowering the work? So let's just chat about that a little bit before we move on.
Yeah, sure. And Branch Out, I really love the direction of the work here, and I called that out at the beginning just to say I think Regen's going to be successful if we can align incentives around contributions at all levels of the work we're doing, both on the ground regeneration, but also all the kind of knowledge and commons work at other layers in the stack. And so I guess just to sum up, the utility that I see being most useful here is integrating something like this climate wiki with this branch token in a way similar to Wikipedia contributors having a reputation score. If there could be some kind of equivalent like this for the branch token, so that contributors would be getting paid, and I guess I kind of, in my mind, that's kind of the minimum viable product, and I feel like there's probably a fair amount of work to sort of bridge the Wikimedia platform with this branch token and whatever method of kind of tracking these contributions in a fair and equitable way. So I'll just keep it simple at that and pass it over to you.
I have just to sort of chime in before you respond, Branch Out. I have a sense that actually this may be easier than we think it is, insofar as how eco credits are designed is to have an administrator, which is a DAO essentially, like using the groups module, that can assign issuers. Those issuers could also be DAOs, like there can be a little council, and it just seems to me like potentially there could just be a quarterly sort of like human-led review process and assignment of value contribution that has some simple metrics, and that you could start with something very minimum viable that essentially leverages the existing tech stack, and then can like run on that and play with it for a little while, 6 months or a year or something, and then suggest upgrades and not get too caught up in. I think that approach is probably a great one, and I agree, Will, with your general sort of thrust. So anyway, that's just a thought, and yeah, Branch, I'd love to hear your response to Will and just any ideas this spurs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll just start by thanking Will again for his thoughtful feedback. I can tell he put a lot of effort and thought about a lot of these things. On this question of the eco credits and Branch as an eco credit, we kind of want to launch it as kind of the simplest effective version, kind of leaning as little as possible on needing technical innovation. And so what we see that as being is simply having the token available and being able to pay people for contributions to the wiki. The extent to which that is integrated within the functionality of the wiki is increasingly programmed with smart contracts or other front-end programming, I think, is something that we would want to see evolve over time. But even a simple tokenomic system that we've been experimenting or thinking about experimentally would be something like a bounty system with NFTs, where you can mint an NFT that has an amount of tokens available, and then when our editorial team has deemed like the creation of a page based on that, right, then the NFT is given, and then a certain amount of branches assigned. And so over time, we could have a more rigorous methodology for assessing like the quality of contributions and the rigor of them and the originality and metrics like that, that would enable kind of a more robust and in-depth way of doing it. But to start with, our goal is just to have the token be available so that, for instance, when we airdrop it to Regen holders, our plan there is just to simply be able to empower the Regen community to be able to pay people to create new pages of interest to the Regen community. And so as long as we have the functionality to just be able to facilitate that transfer and exchange, we want to do it in a way that is as technically non-demanding to start, both to lower costs and just to get the thing out as soon as possible.
I'll make some comments. I think that there is a bit of a technical threshold with some of the strategy that you're outlining. So I think Will is right in pointing that out. But I don't think, I just think there needs to be some tweaks to sort of assumptions. And I think the existing EcoCredit module and the basket module especially can be used in a really dynamic way to accomplish this, more than likely, but it's going to need a little massaging. So I'll try to put some thoughts into that and make some suggestions. And I would suggest we probably need to, do another round of maybe workshopping this with some, maybe an engineer involved. I just want to invite Dream Freely Labs to chime in or say hello. Note, I do want to start to move the conversation towards on-chain standards governance and DMRV at some point in the next, 5 minutes or so. But Dream Freely, welcome up to the stage. And you want to introduce yourself and just share any thoughts or questions you've got about this?
Hello, how y'all doing? Can you hear me? Even if I put you in my pocket?
Loud and clear. Hello, hello.
Hello, my name is Canon Carlos. I also go by Culture Clap on the internet. I will be very quick. Next of all, Thomas, lovely to see you in the digital space. Later on, I will ask for your assistance with the drum roll moving forward, but my name is Canon Carlos. I am currently in Medellin, Colombia. To set the tone, we are in the process of walking out of 70 years of civil war. Very much in our presidential elections right now. While as many may know, we are very near to the Amazon, which is one of the primary lungs of the planet. I am Muisca. We were the original people who cared for the land near Bacatá, which is colonially known as Bogota these days. I maintain other connections. I'm not going to get into thoughts on indigeneity or any of this kind of stuff, so much as to say that I have created something which I would like to share with you all. As well, I would seek your participation because this idea comes from a place of joy, and it comes from a place of love, and I think that that's where regeneration needs to start, no matter where one finds himself, no matter what one finds themselves doing. So, to these ends, yesterday, I went to Namecheap and I bought a website. The day before, I had some other conversations with some other people. And the website that I have created, Thomas, would you do me the small assistance of a small drum roll, please, if you're available in there? Boom! weeklyregen.com. That's right, folks. It is not HTTPS yet, but it is http://www.weeklyregen.com. What I would like to do there is use some tools that JokeDAO has created to surface the most prescient and necessary conversations. One of the things that oftentimes concerns me when I am speaking to people in regen crypto spaces is that even though I do have an education from the global north, I have a difficult time being able to follow what it is that you're talking about. Well, in order to create the change we all know is necessary, I believe that this needs to be more accessible to those who do not have immediate access to such technical and academic knowledge. To those ends, every single week, I would like the community's help to surface the conversations that are most prescient to y'all. And then I'm going to make some briefs on those. I'm going to publish them on Via Mirror, and we'll continue to go. This is step 0 of a much larger work that we're doing at Dream Freely Labs. That's all I got. Thank you so very much for your time. And my name was Kevin Carlos. Gracias.
Kevin Carlos, and we'll be down in Medellin in our autumn up north in September. So maybe we'll get to see you down there.
That'd be super cool.
And thanks for sharing. Super exciting. And it seems like there's a lot of intersections with Climate Wiki. I hope you two are jamming, not just on this spaces, but more broadly. So super excited. I saw the website pop up, was stoked. Glad you popped in to share. Yeah, so rock on. Let us know how we can keep helping. Definitely will be engaging as the first step.
Real quick, if folks want to go to Dream Freely Labs, they can check my pinned tweet to drop their ENS. I'm going to be completely honest. I studied economics, statistics, and a bunch of other crap up at the University of Minnesota. I spent life dealing with things that was painful and colonialism, but it did give me an insight as to how to play a different game. I would very much love people's support in being able to play this different game. I'm not asking for money up front. I am asking for attention, which perhaps is a greater currency. With that, I bid you adieu. Muchísimas gracias.
And de nada. And you're right. Attention is the most valuable currency. So, and happy to give some. So rock on. All right, Ricardo Bajon, welcome to Regenerati News Hour. Super grateful to have you up here. And I think it's time to start shifting gears on this news hour towards the sort of current chaotic carbon market scenario. Feels like the gloves have come off or something, and everybody's or like everybody's sitting around a saloon with their guns under the table or something like that.
That's an apt analogy there, Greg. It's kind of funny from one Colombian to the next, but yes.
Welcome. Yeah, welcome up. And I'm, just as an aside, there is some energy around organizing a sort of refi space down in Colombia, outside of Medellin. The BICO WG group is working on this. So just to note that there's some stuff happening there. So, it might be fun. I'll keep you and others apprised about that. Seems like serendipitous. Yeah.
That'd be great. And in terms of the space we're at, I think your analogy is apt. I think the time has come to sort of like all put our guns on the table and say, all right, how do we all get out of this alive? And I think there's a way, because ultimately I think that the legacy carbon markets, for all their failings, have brought us to where we are today and have created a system that is growing and with interest, and there's a lot of good things there. So there's a lot of babies in that bathwater that I think we need to rescue and save. But there's a lot of things that Web3 and crypto and other of the stuff that is happening in this space could really bring to the table and turbocharge it. So I do believe that there is a way forward if we can just get everybody in a room and meeting each other and talking about, well, what is it that we need? And I do think that there's a lot of, misunderstandings, in some case deliberate misrepresentations of what's been happening with Vera and ACR over the last few weeks. I think that what happened with Vera was they were basically saying that if you're going to tokenize carbon, don't do it from retired carbon credits. And I know that that's been the preferred mechanism because there hasn't been another mechanism really. And they haven't provided it, and they haven't moved quickly enough to provide it. But I think there is an intention now to do that from the part of Vera, and I think there's an intention to figure out how to connect with Web3 on the part of ACR as well. So my hope is that I can reach out to both Mary Grady, David Antonioli, all the key players in these places are friends of mine that I've been working with for many, many years, from the start of ACR to the start of VCS, which became Vera. So I'm hoping that maybe we can broker some sort of deal to think about, well, what do we need to do and how do we get there and how do we involve more of the key players in the Web3 space and the crypto space in building that system. I guess the analogy I would use is that what we really need at this point is a kind of Swift for the carbon markets. And by that I mean, nobody's going to change who runs the US dollar and nobody's going to change who runs the Colombian peso, but we can figure out mechanisms for communication between all of these approaches to carbon and for transactions to happen in all of these approaches to carbon. So, what is the right way to tokenize carbon? And what is the right way to have communications between on-chain and off-chain carbon? And I think it'll be a missed opportunity if Vera goes off and does that itself, and it'll be a missed opportunity if the Web3 crowd goes off and does it themselves. So let's figure out how to do it together.
100%. I totally, I resonate with that analysis. I think, although I have, so I was going to sort of jokingly say, Ricardo, I think you're probably the only guy with a dot ETH ENS name in your Twitter bio that's going to come out and defend the legacy carbon actors. So I love it. I mean, I love that. And I myself have been substantially swayed by your reasoned arguments here. Because I think there's a couple of things going on here. And, and I think the part of this may just be the lack of in-person time and maybe cultural or even generational differences that I think, as you're saying, really shouldn't be getting in the way with some simple functional conversations about how we build in basic interoperability so that people, there's just piping. Carbon credits need to be able to flow around an economy and ensure that you know what you bought and make sure that it can be appropriately accounted for, because the value of a carbon market is its ability to meaningfully account for carbon reduction from the atmosphere, right? That's the foundation of this. And if we can't do that for some reason, then the market isn't going to work. And it doesn't matter what, I guess, role you play in the market, there won't be confidence and therefore there won't be value. So I think there's pretty clearly some shared ground to work from here to make this all kind of work. So with that, I'd love to go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that I do agree that there's a way to work around this. I actually think that to some degree, from my knowledge of the people involved, I think they'd be open to doing that, to having that conversation. I think, you have to remember that the legacy carbon markets grew up at a very different era when technologies were different, so it was set up differently. And we just need to upgrade them to the new era. And there's going to be some kind of pushback and some conservatism, which was born out of a lot of attacks and scars that have, crusted over in the carbon markets, because people have constantly attacked carbon offsets and carbon markets for lacking integrity, not being real, not being useful, all these things. So they approach things from a very cautious kind of defensive posture of how do we not lose integrity? And I think if we can assure them that no, this is actually going to bring even greater integrity potentially to the carbon markets, then I think they'll be open to it. And it's just new technologies and new approaches. So
I do have to say, when I mentioned that we could bring greater integrity to the carbon markets to David at Vera, he was pretty prickly that such a thing was even possible.
Well,
I think that's the challenge. Is I think you're pointing to something which is where this gets lost in translation is, and gosh, I do this as a human, as a person. If somebody starts with a critique, then I'm immediately going to be defensive. And right, so how do you start with honoring all the hard work that's happened and the shoulders that you're standing on, while also communicating fundamental changes or evolution or shifts that can really empower what everybody's wanting here? And I think mostly this is a communication breakdown.
Yeah,
That's the big,
and I
yeah.
agree, and I'm old enough to know that in 20 years, somebody's going to come and say stuff about what we're doing now, and say I'm going to fix it, I'm going to make it better, and we're going to bristle and react. It happens, and I think we just have to like tone down the prickliness on both sides and sort of say, look, we actually are all trying to do the same thing, and we're trying to make it all better and have it work better. And if we take that approach, I think we're going to get a whole lot farther, because these things are moving really, really fast. And where I do fault the legacy carbon markets is that they've begun a process to try and figure out how to incorporate crypto, but they haven't involved key players in the crypto space as much as they should have. So let's fix that. Let's make sure that whatever comes up, folks on this call and another crypto carbon initiatives are part of the discussion.
Well, I just have to say, I mean, on that point, I find that these legacy institutions are basically incapable of making of discerning appropriate technology partners. So unfortunately, I think there's all of these layers of, I guess, economic bias that enter into it. And so when making technology partners, I myself, sort of as a Web3 entrepreneur and native, the first thing I'm going to do if somebody is proposing a technology partnership to me is I'm going to go look at their GitHub, and I'm going to assess their open source code for quality, for the number of contributions, and for the places that it's an active deployment. And I think instead of that kind of like, hey, who's actually doing rigorous work at this intersection of technology and carbon markets, what's happening is the people who are the institutional bias is going to be, who has a WeWork founder in their board, or who has the largest amount of money behind them. And unfortunately, I guess my concern is that what ends up happening is, instead of choosing for technological competence or ethical alignment, we end up choosing for financial, like the ease by which a new middleman can insert themselves and make somebody lots of money from the scenario. I've been pretty concerned. I have to say, the last 2 weeks have been really concerning to me, just watching this all go down and watching how everybody's behaving. And I do think I share your optimism and sort of clarity around what needs to happen is sort of like frank, transparent, clear conversations in which people are working towards an aligned, like, hey, we're all in this together to make this market function. But I see most of the behavior being sort of like a player versus player Game of Thrones kind of scenario, in which people are leveraging up their social capital, their financial capital, and sort of like jostling and jockeying, not for what is going to make sense for the optimal outcome for the system and for like the outcomes of planetary regeneration, of balanced carbon budget, of clear carbon accounting, but for their ability to take the monopoly on what they think is a giant financial opportunity. And that I am enormously alarmed by, to be frank. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I am too, to be honest with you. But, I know these people, they wouldn't have been in the carbon markets if they wanted to get rich, because, this wasn't what it is now when all of this was started. And I keep saying to people that when VCS was created, and had we had the technologies, it probably would have been created as a DAO, because it was a market coming together, cooperating to figure out, like, hey, we need integrity here. We need standards. We need a way of doing this. Otherwise, we're going to, this market is never going to take off. So, look, I think there are people out there that are just in it to make money and get rich. But I also think there are a lot of people out there that really want to make this world a better place and think carbon markets are a way to do that. And so let's at least work with them.
Well, exactly. And my assessment is definitely that the legacy institutions do have good intentions, right? And are made up of humans who are ethical, and maybe there's a critique to be made, as you were saying, based on like lived experience of 20 years of carbon markets getting pummeled. They're sort of scarred and reactive in certain ways. And it's completely understandable. And and let's be honest, like crypto and Web3 has a lot of froth. It has a lot of hand waviness. There's a danger in which good intentions sort of like lead in the wrong direction. So it's an interesting and hazardous moment. So I want to there's two things that I want to sort of like, my instinct here is that is actually probably pretty useful for everybody in our community to hear a clear defense from you around, like explain to me if I'm carbon skeptical. Like, Ricardo, if I was to come and say, and be one of those people that says, hey, carbon credits are just they're nothing more than a permit to emit more. All we're doing is be permissive towards polluters to keep polluting. That's all this is just a giant farce. And just to be clear, I don't believe that, actually. But there was a point in time that I did believe it. And over educating myself and leaning in and sort of engaging, I've evolved my perception. I'm sort of curious, how do you respond to that kind of like pushback of like, this is all just a scam? Carbon markets completely are a scam. I think that'd be probably super useful for folks to hear how you deal with that.
Yeah. I've never been asked this question before, Greg, but no.
I imagine it's such an uncommon position to have.
Exactly. Yeah, no, look, I figure it would probably be a similar response as if somebody came to the crypto community and said, all crypto is a scam, all cryptos are Ponzi schemes and a way to waste energy, right? It's the same kind of response at times, but I would just say that, look, the fundamental problem we have in our economic system is that the environmental externalities don't show up on anybody's balance sheet, right? When a company cuts down a forest, the only way they make money and a positive signal on their balance sheet is by selling wood, right? They don't make money, and it doesn't show up on their balance sheet for keeping that forest standing, even though the value of the services that forest provides are way, way greater probably than the wood. Not probably, definitely than the wood value in the economic system. But our economic system is broken. So there is a whole different economic system that we need to build towards. And that economic system has to internalize those externalities, count ecosystem services. But how do you do that in an economic system that was designed not 20 years ago, but several hundred years ago, right? And is hopelessly outdated. Well, you need to get creative, and you need to figure out, one day maybe we'll reboot the system, but until that happens, we're probably going to need a few patches. And the way of creating those patches is by putting a value on those ecosystem services, carbon being one of them, and carbon being one of the most interesting ones at the moment because of the way it's structured. So I think there's a number of benefits from having a functioning carbon market. One of the benefits is that it puts a price on carbon. So even if you take away the whole benefits of the money going to project developers and offsets, which I think is important, but just let's put it aside for the moment. Even without that, putting that price sends a signal to our economic system that emitting a ton of carbon isn't free and shouldn't be free, and it has a cost. And once it has a cost, then people think differently about it. How do I stop emitting? How do I reduce emissions? So that's one edge of the sword here. The other edge of the sword is putting that money to good work with offset projects that are real and have integrity. And that is kind of where these standards have grown up, is figuring out, well, what constitutes a good carbon credit? How do we know? How do we measure? How do we understand? What are the protocols for monitoring, reporting, and verification? And, they are complex because it's a difficult thing to do. And people don't understand that most of these systems, it's not like Vera's coming up with a standard. They are saying, this is what a good standard looks like. Send us your protocols. Tell us what you think should be the measurement, and we will judge them against this standard of what constitutes a good credit. So all of the methodologies that Vera has have been submitted by somebody else, have been written by somebody else. They've just been, approved by Vera or what have you. So it's not like nobody can come up with methodologies. It's entirely a sort of like open source approach. And I mean, look, it's a little bit unfair to criticize them for not looking at the GitHubs of the people involved, because honestly, they probably don't even know what GitHub is. They're not technology people.
But
They've been in
that's
and that's a
the problem,
problem.
though.
Yes, exactly. But that's why we need, people who do, like you guys, to be talking with them and figuring out how do we actually, create the back end information infrastructures that will allow this to actually work, that will allow us to tokenize in the right way, right? Because tokenizing by taking retired credits, which could be a backdoor for effectively double counting a retirement or double claiming an offset, is probably not the right way. And I think Vera was right to say that, and to say, look, this is going to lead to more problems. Let's figure out a better way. So I think
I
that
definitely
is
agree with that. I definitely agree there's a better way. I think that way is incumbent on Vera, not on the
absolutely,
tokenizers. So it's like,
yeah, agreed.
like
But
given the scenarios, making those retirements, and, each of those retirements in the memo has a link to the tokenized credit. It's sort of, you can get upset because there's a semantic issue of retirement, but Vera has everything in their power to just not count those as retired, right? Because it's all there. It's all transparent.
yeah,
We
yeah.
chose to move it. So semantics aside, I think that was a good, baby step. But I also want
What
to
I
be
was going to
clear.
say, Greg, is
I'm
that I think
biased because I think it all needs to be natively Web3,
well,
right from the get-go. Yeah.
And I think we need a whole new economic system that values externalities, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. So let's figure out how we get there, right? And I think what we have to judge them on now is sort of like, let's hold them to their word, and to sort of say, look, you've got to involve people who do know what GitHub is in this process, and who do know how to create the infrastructure and what they need, because they're part of your customers, and they're being increasingly important customer base for any standard. And yes, we may have new standards coming up, and love the stuff that you guys are doing with eco credits, and that's fine too. But we just need to have a system that allows for some level of communication. That's why the SWIFT for carbon is what I think we need to talk about. And if we leave
I
it at
think
that,
that's called IBC, but maybe that's a conversation
maybe
for another day.
maybe one day it will be IBC, Greg. But right now it's not, because Vera, ACR, VCS, and these are the people who are selling, millions upon millions of tons to very big buyers, which are sort of the people we also want to get involved in this carbon market. And they need to be a part of it too. So let's push them. Let's help them build a system that makes more sense than the one that we currently have. And let's also push them to go fast and do that, and involve the people that are in this call, in this Web3 space, in the refi space, in that process. So I think that we can do.
Can I chime in on this one? Is that okay? So in terms of standards, I think there's a really big opportunity to work, with not just Vera, but other folks on the lower level standards, even across chains. There's a really good group called Token Taxonomy Framework that was born out of Ethereum, and then has gone to be focused on interoperable solutions for things like what they're calling voluntary ecological markets, but things like broadly carbon credits or anything like water rights tokens or impact tokens. And it now lives within what they call the Global Blockchain Business Council. And they've built these technical standards so that we can build Web3 native token schemas, as well as MRV schemas, and put out definitions for things like durability, leakage, additionality, so that whether you're working with Vera or you're working in new types of methodologies, that we can actually speak some of the same languages and go from that Web 2 to Web 3 format. I come from the Hedera ecosystem, and I'm helping fund a lot of projects related to an open source piece of code called the Guardian. So speaking of going and looking it on GitHub, if you go to hashgraph/Guardian, you'll find it. But that's one implementation of the IWA Interwork Alliance or Token Taxonomy Framework specs around these assets. And I would just encourage folks to take a look at that, because it may be a resource. I think it'd be great if Regen was a part of those types of standards organizations where we can bring new ideas to the table, but also, align with different parties. I don't know if anyone's attended in the past for those types of meetings or forums, but I think it's a really good opportunity to bridge that gap and create new dialogues. And in terms of being able to make it work, it also allows Vera to participate in probably a safe way from their perspective to say, well, we do approve of a methodology if someone's digitizing something like their version of Red plus APD, regardless of what you think about the methodology itself. You can say, well, you can compare it to other equivalents. I know Gold Standard has a working group that they just put out, in partnership with IOTA on trying to digitize methodologies and MRVs.
Oh my goodness! This is what I'm talking about related to. So this is all great. This is all super great. I'm aware of Interwork and the Global Blockchain Business Alliance work, and we have sunk quite a bit of energy and time into other sort of what we would see as more. I don't know. There's an awful lot of noise in those spaces as well. I think this is kind of like I am wary of those being actually safe spaces. They oftentimes feel like complicated sales avenues for well-funded initiatives that are trying to extract value as tech providers, and not actually genuine spaces for innovating and agreeing on standards. So that's just been my experience so far. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case with Interwork Alliance, although I kind of got that vibe and sort of deprioritized participation because of that. But, I should give it another chance. Clearly, it's important. Like, these sort of spaces are important. And they need to be neutral, right? Yeah. They need to be neutral. And I oftentimes don't feel like they are actually neutral or filled with like competent tech people, because competent tech people don't want to sit in conversations that are essentially like long sales processes.
Right. So for that group specifically, there's a few different groups tied to emissions, just general ecological markets, and other areas around renewables. But I think they're really focused on like taxonomical definitions of like what is durability. And so I would say it's a relatively safe space, but there is certainly a good debate. There's folks like the Chia Network who are a part of it. There's other, I would say it's a relatively open and academic dialogue that participation's encouraged. And I think there's two elements to it, right? I don't think the folks there are trying to figure out, what is the best methodology from an environmental perspective, but certainly they are trying to make sure that those methodologies are enabled in a Web3 native format. So that, in our case, when we go to implement those standards, we're looking at putting every single attribute, every single attestation tied to a data collection point on Ledger, but we know some ledgers aren't going to do that. We're just trying to do is get to a specification so that we can all understand, what is in fact a credit, what is durability, what is additionality from a technical perspective, so that when somebody says, well, I want to implement a new type of impact credit, then we can better measure it. in a way that folks understand. And maybe that ties into something like what the folks at Branch Out are doing, because I was really excited to hear about that. I think that's a really awesome project. And so, I just think it's, if we know how each other speaks in different how we all speak in different ecosystems, that'll give us a better set of definitions, and it's open and interoperable in a positive way. Yeah.
I think all you're saying is right on, Wes. And I will admit that I feel enormously curmudgeonly about, like, I'm looking at the Interwork Alliance, I'm looking at the Leadership Council, and I'm just like, I'm just shaking my head. I'm just thinking to myself, wow, literally we're 5 years in, having executed multiple tokenization retirement tracking processes, working with many different stakeholders. I don't really there's somebody from Microsoft, Accenture, like a private digital exchange. Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is, I'm just like, come on, folks. Like,
to be fair, didn't Microsoft buy Regen credits from the Carbon Plus project?
100%. And then they proceeded to invest lots of money into a private centralized carbon exchange system that they're like using Interwork Alliance to develop specs for.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of like, there's two scenarios, and there's two scenarios here. One is we have a plausibly neutral, interoperable tracking system for impact credits. The other is we have centralized systems that are owned and operated, in which the data, the monitoring, reporting, verification, and standards are all owned in a vertically integrated system. And unfortunately, right, if that happens, there will be no market trust. And so as people, like, anytime somebody is trying to capture the market into that like vertically integrated, non-decentralized, non-plausibly neutral kind of system, I get pretty prickly. It's like, certain elements might be open, like, cool, we're using an open standard. But if the economics and the governance are such that this is turning into a Libra, right, Facebook's private stablecoin system instead of an open system, I think it's deeply contraindicated for what we actually need to create as a community, right? Because it will undermine trust. And that is unfortunately heretical and unpopular to say in situations like Interwork Alliance, I think, because the assumption is this is going to be something that somebody can just own in a vertically integrated way, right? And that's, I think, super problematic.
But I would say this, like, the only way that you can counterbalance that is by participating, in my personal opinion, and acting as a counterbalance to that voice. I think, of course, a lot of companies, whether they're big or small, have the opportunity to make, good architectural decisions or not so good architectural decisions in terms of building vertically integrated registries or exchanges. My personal view is that the balance sheet for our planet should be on a public ledger, and it shouldn't be in a siloed database that somebody can shut off with a cloud subscription or make permissioned. But at the same time, how they choose to commercialize what they gain out of that is certainly their prerogative. But at the same time, we probably can learn a lot, as Microsoft is a large emitter that has publicly stated goals around. I think they use the word carbon negativity is kind of their goal. And so if there's a lesson to be learned from the buying side of the market, I think there are some good things to think about as buyers who want to use, whether it's Regen or other networks or registries at scale, because I think they bought from like 30, 50 projects when they made their last series of purchases. So I figured maybe I put that out there. I don't know if that's maybe a welcome opinion, but that's something that I certainly think a lot about.
And I hadn't heard of it, so I appreciate that, Wes. I mean, I think there's a lot of initiatives, both from the Web3 side as well as from the legacy carbon markets, to try and figure this out. I just get frustrated that we're going to have so many that it's going to get confusing and problematic and not at all helpful. So how do we bring enough people in the room from these different initiatives and figure out how we create that kind of decentralized, trust-based system that Greg is talking about, and
how do we
that's kind of
ensure
what I
that it
want to do.
actually is inclusive of people who do things, right? this is my concern, is that I like, it needs to be like a group of people getting together and abstractly talking about a token taxonomy, who aren't actively involved in like tokenizing, retiring, engaging, building marketplaces, isn't actually all that valuable, right?
Yeah.
So you can have all the brands associated with it. Like, it needs to be grounded in people who are doing work, and I don't see anybody who's doing work. Like,
Well,
I
let's
see
change
people who
that,
have
Greg.
lots
That's
of
the point.
big budgets for complicated sales processes to capture, to like insert their technology. Anyway, it's frustrating to me.
And I think the opposite
Clearly.
is also true, right? Like if you build it without the standards that, the very large buyers are buying right now, it's also not going to be as useful as it could be. So, I think we can bring these folks together, because there's a lot of project developers developing for Vera or ACR or CAR or Gold Standard that are not in the Web3 space. So, we need to involve some of them too. And this system is evolving. Let's figure out how we get to a place where we're at least, talking to each other, so that we can do really cool stuff across the different markets.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe the last thing I'll say, because I don't want to take too much of the floor, but I run a pretty large like Web3 focused climate fund. We invest in projects around the world. Whether we've done quite a few in Australia, we've done a few in Africa, we've done a few here in the States, but there's we have a bunch of different protocols building on this type of open standard. But my door is always open, so for folks who are interested, please feel free to send me a DM. And if there's interest in getting introduced to folks at the GBVC, which actually is a consolidation of the IWA and GDF, I'm more than happy to help make some of those introductions.
Yeah, I should definitely take you up on that, despite my sort of like curmudgeonliness about it. I think, ultimately, as I'm saying, you're both right. These are important venues to sort of engage with for everybody. And I have my frustrations with my past experiences, but I'll just set those aside and be happy to sort of like lean in and see and be curious about what's moving and what's shaking, and how we can contribute. Branch out. It sounds like you want to just chime in here. I want to note we're past time, so we're also going to start wrapping.
Yeah, I just wanted to hop in on this question of, bringing folk together and kind of having more transparency and even just juxtaposition. So instead of people doing a bunch of different things kind of without having that connection, at least as it pertains to anything about climate, we see that Climate Wiki hopefully will continue to talk and think about how it can help provide some of that transparency, and just being able to look at like different credit classes and methodologies side by side and have a shared set of criteria that is being built in a participatory fashion, hopefully will help resolve at least that aspect of this issue we've been discussing.
Totally. And there are a lot of, I mean, I think the risk here to sort of fall into a player versus player kind of Game of Thrones scenario and have these councils just be that playing out writ large is really real. And, and that's the world that we live in. So we sort of, have to balance that, and keep trying to think about the larger systemic outcome that we're aiming for, and how to out collaborate the competition towards that. So Wes, thanks for hopping up to share. Definitely would love to follow up with you about some of that stuff. Ricardo, thanks for hopping up. Branch Out team, awesome work. Really excited what you're doing. And everybody out in the audience, there's so many people who didn't hop up here but are doing amazing work. I see you all out there. Always feel free to raise your hand and chime in if you've got thoughts. As always, thanks so much for being here for the Regenerati News Hour, and we'll see you all next week. And looking forward to to working with everybody. It's a beautiful thing everybody's working on, and it ain't easy. So we'll keep on rocking.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Take care.